My grandmother left me $400,000. My parents forged my signature and handed every cent to my brother's failing construction business, while they told the entire family I'd blown it on drugs. So I spent 10 years quietly buying the debt for $12,000, and then I foreclosed on his house and sold it at auction while he watched. Before we get into this, drop where you're listening from and your local time in the comments. I read everyone. I'm a 31-year-old woman, and I grew up in Naperville, Illinois, but I live in a small condo in Chicago's West Loop now. My grandmother was the only person in my family who ever saw me as more than a disappointment. She died when I was 18, and up until that point, she had been the buffer against my parents' relentless favoritism toward my older brother, Mark. He's 3 years older, and from the moment he took his first breath, my parents acted like the sun rose and set on his shoulders. I have a vivid memory of being 6 years old at a family Christmas party. My grandmother had given Mark and me each a $50 savings bond. Mark immediately tore his open, complained that it wasn't real money, and threw a tantrum on the living room floor. My father scooped him up, took him to the car, and came back with a brand new Game Boy that they'd apparently hidden as a surprise. I sat on the couch holding my savings bond, confused, and my mother leaned over and whispered, "Don't you dare ruin this for your brother. He just gets emotional." I learned early that his emotions mattered and mine were an inconvenience. That wasn't an isolated incident. It was the template for my entire childhood. I remember my 8th birthday party, when Mark, who was 11, decided he wanted to blow out my candles. He shoved me aside and did it before I could even lean forward. I started crying, and my mother pulled me into the kitchen and hissed, "He's older. He needs to feel included. You have to be the bigger person." So I stood there in the kitchen while everyone sang to an empty chair. That was the first time I realized that being the bigger person meant being invisible. I started writing in a journal that year, a little spiral notebook with a unicorn on the cover, and on the first page I wrote, "I wish someone would pick me first." I still have that notebook in a box in my closet. The double standard was woven into every day like thread in a cheap sweater. At 10, I brought home a report card with all A's and 1 B in math. My father glanced at it and said, "You can do better. Push yourself." That same winter, Mark brought home a report card with 3 D's, 2 C's, and a note from his homeroom teacher about missing assignments. My mother baked him a chocolate cake and said, "School just isn't his thing. He has other talents." I remember sitting at the dinner table, watching him eat a second slice of cake while I pushed peas around my plate, and I felt this hot, sharp confusion in my chest. I was too young to articulate it as injustice, but I understood on a gut level that the rules didn't apply to him. I cleaned my plate and washed the dishes while he watched cartoons. He got the brand new Jeep Wrangler at 16, the one with the detachable doors and a sound system that rattled the windows, because my parents said he needed reliable transportation to his part-time job, which he was fired from 3 months later for no-showing. I got the 15-year-old Honda Civic with a broken air conditioner and a cassette deck that ate my tapes. The windows didn't roll down, and in the summer it felt like a slow cooker. I paid for my own gas with money from babysitting, and when I asked my father for help with an oil change, he said, "Your brother's car needs new tires. Maybe next month." Next month never came. I learned to change my own oil from a YouTube video in the parking lot of an AutoZone, using a socket wrench I bought for $11. He cost my parents $5,000 a year in travel baseball tournaments, where he sat on the bench half the time and yelled at umpires. I asked for $100 to attend a summer writing camp at the community college, and my mother said, "We don't have the budget for hobbies, sweetheart." When Mark smashed the mailbox with a baseball bat at 14, my father laughed and said, "Boys will be boys." When I accidentally knocked a vase off the hall table while vacuuming at 12, it was a 40-minute lecture about carelessness and respect. Every measurement was doubled. I was the responsible one, the quiet one, the one who had to earn every scrap of validation through grades and chores and never making waves. I scrubbed the bathrooms, I folded the laundry, I made dinner 3 nights a week from age 13 onward because my mother said it was my contribution to the household. Mark's contribution was simply existing. He didn't even take out the trash. I remember one Tuesday, I'd made meatloaf and mashed potatoes, and when I set the plates down, my father looked at his portion and said, "The meatloaf is a little dry," and my mother nodded. Mark had eaten 3 helpings and said nothing. Not a thank you, not a good job. I cleared the table and did the dishes while they watched a movie. I don't want to paint myself as a perfect angel because I wasn't. I was bitter and sarcastic, and I wrote angry poetry in a journal I hid under my mattress. But I never broke a law, never did a drug, never talked back in a way that burned a bridge. I just absorbed it all and channeled it into school. When I graduated high school with a 3.92 GPA and a partial scholarship to DePaul, my mother looked at me across the kitchen table and said, "At least you won't cost us as much as your brother's trade school." That was the full extent of my congratulations. I remember sitting there, holding the acceptance letter, and feeling this hollow ache in my chest that I couldn't name until years later. It was the slow, creeping realization that no achievement of mine would ever be enough because I wasn't the child they wanted to celebrate. The letter had the DePaul seal, navy and red, and I'd imagined my parents framing it or taking me out to dinner. Instead, my father grunted from behind his newspaper, and my mother turned back to chopping vegetables. I went up to my room, sat on my bed, and read the acceptance letter out loud to myself in a whisper, like if I said it softly enough, it would still be true. Then I folded it carefully, tucked it into my grandmother's notebook of quotes, and cried without making a sound because I had learned that my tears were a burden. My grandmother saw it all. Her name was Alina, and she was a retired high school English teacher who had invested wisely after my grandfather died and lived modestly in a 2-bedroom bungalow in Oak Park. She never remarried, never dated, just gardened and read and volunteered at the library. She was the only adult who looked at me like I was a whole person. I have this memory from when I was 10. She took me to a greenhouse, and we spent an hour picking out tomato seedlings. She taught me how to dig a hole, how to pack the soil, how to water just enough and not too much. As we worked, she said, "Plants don't care who your parents love more. They just need sun and water and someone who shows up." That's a good lesson for people, too. I didn't understand the subtext then, but I remembered it. She never confronted my parents directly because she knew from experience that they'd punish me after she left. She told me once, when I was 15 and crying because my father had screamed at me for getting a B on a physics test, "Your parents are small people, sweetheart. They're not evil. They're just so small that your light scares them. Don't let them dim it." I didn't fully understand what she meant then, but I wrote it down and read it 1,000 times over the years. By the time I was 16, I had a whole notebook of quotes from her, little snippets I'd jot down after every visit. She was the only person who ever asked me what I thought about a book I'd read or what I dreamed of doing. The summer before she got sick, she took me to the Chicago Botanic Garden, and we spent the whole afternoon wandering the Japanese garden. She told me that when I was older, she wanted me to travel and see the gardens of Kyoto. "They have moss gardens there that are hundreds of years old," she said. "Imagine what those gardens have seen. They just keep growing no matter what." That was the last peaceful day I ever had with her. I wrote that down too, and later, when everything fell apart, I would trace those words with my finger like a talisman. She took me on weekend trips to the Art Institute, where she'd explain the paintings with such passion that I almost forgot we were standing in a cold gallery. She taught me how to balance a checkbook when I was 11, sitting at her kitchen table with a ledger and a stack of pretend bills. She drove me to my first job interview at 15 and waited in the parking lot to take me out for ice cream afterward, win or lose. I got the job, a summer position at a local bookstore, and she bought me a used copy of Pride and Prejudice as a celebration. When the cancer came, it was swift and cruel. Stage 4 pancreatic, diagnosed in March, she was gone by July. I spent every possible hour in that hospice room, reading aloud from her favorite novels, holding her thin hand while the machines beeped. My parents visited twice for 20 minutes each. Mark didn't come at all. He said hospitals made him uncomfortable. The morning she died, I was sitting in the chair next to her bed, and she opened her eyes for just a moment, squeezed my hand, and said, "You're going to be okay. Don't let them take your heart." Then she was gone. The room went still. I sat there for an hour while the nurses came and went, and then I walked out into the July heat and felt like the world had lost its color. A few days before she died, she called a lawyer to the hospice and set up a trust. $400,000 to be held by my parents as trustees until I turned 25. The trust document specified that the money could only be used for my education, a home down payment, or business startup. My parents were listed as trustees with a fiduciary duty, but my grandmother was too weak to realize, or too trusting, that the document lacked an independent trustee or a poison pill clause. She trusted them because they were her son and daughter-in-law, and she loved them despite everything. At the funeral, my father pulled me aside by the elbow, his grip harder than necessary, and said, "That money is a safety net, not a shopping spree. Don't get any ideas. We'll manage it responsibly, and if you prove you're mature enough, maybe you'll see some of it when you're 25. I was too numb to respond. I just nodded and watched them lower her into the ground. That night, I sat in my room and opened the notebook of her quotes. On the last page from a conversation a month before she died, I'd written, "Remember, you have a life of your own. It doesn't belong to them." I traced the words with my finger and cried until I couldn't see. Looking back, there were signs I ignored. The way my mother always called Mark's failures bad luck and mine character flaws. The way my father asked to see my pay stubs when I was 16, scrutinizing every penny, but never once checked Mark's bank account as he drained theirs. The way family dinners would pivot from my A- in calculus to Mark's latest brilliant business idea, a landscaping venture that lasted a month, then a pressure washing scheme that never left the driveway. The way my parents referred to the trust as the family money instead of your grandmother's gift to you. The way my mother would bring up the trust at odd moments, her voice casual, saying things like, "When that money comes in, Mark could really use a partner for his construction company," as if the trust was a group asset we should all share. I ignored all of it because I wanted to believe, with a desperation that bordered on pathetic, that deep down they loved me equally. They didn't, and the moment that truth crystallized was so sudden and so violent that it cleaved my life into a before and an after. I was 20 years old and in my second year at DePaul. I lived in a cramped dorm room with a roommate named Kelsey, who blasted EDM at 2 in the morning and left half-eaten takeout containers rotting under her bed. I had a work-study job in the library reshelving books, 12 hours a week at $9 an hour. I'd also saved up a $5,000 emergency fund from 2 summers of waitressing at a pancake house on Ogden Avenue, where I worked double shifts and learned to carry 6 plates up one arm. I was proud of that money. It was the first real security I'd ever built for myself, and I guarded it like a dragon. My relationship with my parents was distant but civil. They'd call every few weeks, usually on Sunday evenings, and the calls always followed the same script. A shallow inquiry about my grades, a tight-lipped acknowledgement of my busyness, and then a long, detailed monologue about Mark's latest crisis. His construction company, Mark's Custom Builders LLC, had been seeded with $120,000 from my parents' retirement savings and 3 co-signed loans from a local credit union. He'd started it 2 years earlier with grand promises about high-end kitchen remodels and custom decks, but the reality was a series of disasters. He underbid contracts to win them, then discovered he couldn't afford materials. He hired crews of guys he knew from high school who showed up late and left early. He refused to fire a childhood friend named Dave who kept stealing copper piping and selling it for scrap. My parents bailed him out 3 times already. The first bailout was $17,000 to cover a supplier lien. The second was $23,000 when a client sued for shoddy work. The third was $31,000 when the IRS audited him for unpaid payroll taxes. Every time my mother would call me with a strained voice and say, "You need to understand that family helps family. Your brother is under so much stress. He barely sleeps. He's trying so hard." I mostly gray-rocked them, offering noncommittal sounds and changing the subject. I'd learned that arguing only drained me. Then one Saturday in early October, they summoned me home for a family meeting. The word summoned is accurate. My mother texted me at 7 in the morning. "Dinner tonight, 6 p.m. Your father and I need to discuss something important with you and your brother. Please be here. Don't be late." No question mark. No please that felt real. I almost didn't go, but a tiny, stupid part of me hoped this was the moment they'd acknowledge my efforts, maybe even offer to help with my tuition shortfall. That hope was a weed that kept regrowing no matter how many times I thought I'd pulled it. I even dressed up a little, a nicer blouse and earrings my grandmother had given me, like if I looked put together, they'd finally see me. I borrowed Kelsey's car, a rusted-out Corolla that smelled like vape juice, and drove the 40 minutes to Naperville. The house looked the same, a beige split level with a lawn my father manicured obsessively. Inside, my mother had made a full spread, baked ziti with extra mozzarella, garlic bread, a Caesar salad. My father sat at the head of the dining table with a yellow legal pad and a pen, his glasses perched low on his nose. Mark slouched in a chair at the other end, looking wrecked. He had red-rimmed eyes, greasy hair, and a stale beer smell that hit me before I even sat down. My mother fussed with the salad tongs and smiled too widely when I walked in. There she is, our college girl. Her voice was high and brittle, the kind of cheerful that's holding back something frantic. Mark wouldn't meet my eyes. I knew on some animal level that I was walking into an ambush. I sat down and refused the glass of wine my mother poured. She immediately refilled her own. The tension in the room was so thick I could feel it pressing against my skin. My father cleared his throat and launched into what sounded like a boardroom presentation. He explained that Mark's company had landed a huge contract, a full renovation of a historic Victorian in Glen Ellen, $200,000 in projected revenue. The problem was the project required $150,000 in upfront costs for materials and specialized subcontractors, and Mark had no cash. He'd already maxed out 3 credit cards and taken a home equity line on the starter house my parents had helped him buy. My parents had nothing left to give. They drained their own emergency fund, and their retirement was halved. So they decided to borrow the money from my trust, just temporarily, and pay it back with 10% interest once the project paid out in 6 months. My father said all of this with the casual, reasonable tone you'd use to discuss a car repair. He didn't ask. He announced. My mother kept nodding along, her eyes darting between us like a referee at a tennis match. I remember the way the ziti sat untouched on my plate as my brain processed the words. $150,000. A temporary loan. My trust, my future, reduced to a line item in a rescue plan for a man who had never once asked me how my day was. I said no. I said it calmly at first, my voice steady. No, Dad, that trust is for my education, my future. It's not a slush fund for Mark's business. It's not legal, and it's not happening. My father's face started to mottle, patches of red spreading up his neck. My mother set down her fork with a clatter that made me flinch. Sweetheart, you're not seeing the big picture, she said. When Mark succeeds, this whole family succeeds. He'll take care of all of us. Don't you want that? Don't you want to be part of something bigger? I said, I am part of something bigger. It's called my own life, and I'm building it. I don't want Mark's money. I want my grandmother's. Mark slammed his fist on the table so hard the water glasses shook. You selfish little brat, he hissed. You've never supported me, not once. You just sit up in your ivory tower judging everyone while I'm out here killing myself to make something of the family name. He shoved his chair back and stormed out to the backyard, slamming the slider so hard I thought the glass would crack. I could hear him kicking something on the patio, a planter maybe, the terracotta shattering. My father leaned forward, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. We are the trustees, young lady. That means we have the legal authority to manage that money in your best interest, and we have determined that investing in your brother's company is in your best interest. It will generate returns. It will build wealth for when you graduate. You're 20 years old. You don't know what's good for you. I stood up, my hands trembling, and grabbed my coat. If you touch a single dollar of that trust, I will report you to the police, the bank, and the state attorney general. I will burn every bridge you have. Do not test me. My father laughed a short, ugly bark. Report us to who? We're your parents. The bank knows us. We've had accounts there for 30 years. You think they're going to believe some hysterical 20-year-old over pillars of the community? My mother, tears streaming now, reached for my hand. I pulled away. Please, she whispered. Please don't make this harder than it has to be. We're under so much stress. You have no idea. We love you. We're trying to protect you. The word protect in her mouth tasted like poison. I left that house, drove back to Chicago in the dark, and lay awake in my dorm room until dawn, staring at the ceiling, replaying every word. I didn't cry. I was too angry to cry. I just lay there, rigid, my jaw clenched so tight it ached. For 2 months, I lived in a state of low-grade terror. I checked the trust account portal online every morning before class and every night before bed. The balance hovered at $403,214.16. I memorized that number. It became a prayer. I started convincing myself that maybe my father's bluster was just that, bluster. Maybe they'd realized I was serious and backed down. I let my guard down. I stopped sleeping with my phone clutched in my hand. I started to believe I was safe. I even went home for a Sunday visit in late October, a tense meal where no one mentioned money, just talked about the weather and the neighbor's new fence. I thought we'd moved past it. I was naive. Then one Monday in late November, a week before Thanksgiving, I logged into the portal during my usual 5:30 a.m. check and saw a zero balance. Not a decimal error, not a page refresh glitch. $0.00. My stomach dropped so fast I felt nauseous. I stared at it until my eyes burned, scrolling up and down, refreshing the page, closing the browser and reopening it. The transaction history showed a wire transfer outdated 6 weeks prior, on October 11th, 10 days after that dinner. The full $403,000 had been wired to a business account under Mark's Custom Builders LLC, a different bank. I called the trust bank's customer service line, my fingers so cold I could barely press the buttons. I got a rep named Marcus with a calm, procedural voice. I told him I'd never authorized the transfer. I told him I'd never signed anything. He went quiet for a few seconds, the kind of quiet that means someone is reading something they don't want to read. Then he said, "Ma'am, according to our records, the transfer was authorized with your signature, witnessed by both trustees, and deposited according to the trust's terms. If you believe this is fraudulent, you'll need to come into a branch and file a claim in person." I asked him if I could see a copy of the signed document. He said he'd email it to the address on file. The PDF arrived 5 minutes later. I opened it on my cracked phone screen, sitting in my dorm bed with Kelsey snoring 6 feet away. The document was a standard fund disbursement request, filled out in my mother's loopy handwriting, with my name typed as the beneficiary. At the bottom, there was a signature line with a signature that was supposed to be mine. My chest went so cold I thought I was having a heart attack. The signature was a clumsy, childlike approximation of my name. The L in my first name, which I always loop with a sharp downward stroke, was looped lazily to the right, the wrong way. The R in my middle initial was rounded when mine is angular. The entire thing looked like someone had copied it from a sample while looking in a mirror. I knew my own signature like my own heartbeat. I'd signed 1,000 documents, 100 receipts, every birthday card I'd ever given. This was a forgery, and a bad one. I pulled out a birthday card my grandmother had given me when I turned 16, the one where she'd written my full name in her elegant script, and I'd signed my name underneath to show her how my handwriting had matured. I compared them side by side. The difference was so obvious it made me sick. My mother had tried to write my name, and she'd gotten it wrong. I drove straight to the Naperville branch, walked past the tellers who knew my face from years of childhood deposits, and asked to speak to the branch manager. A woman named Denise, heavy-set and kind-faced, led me to her office and closed the door. I laid the printed email and my grandmother's card on her desk and explained what happened. She studied both signatures for a long time, her lips pressed together. Then she sighed and said, "Honey, I believe you, but here's the problem. Your parents are co-trustees on a custodial trust. That gives them very broad authority to manage the assets as they see fit. The fact that they submitted a signature that isn't yours, well, that's forgery. But proving it was malicious intent against a co-trustee requires a police report and an attorney. Without those, my hands are tied. I can flag the account and freeze it, but there's nothing in it to freeze. The money is gone." I asked her if I could press charges. She said I could file a fraud claim, but the police would likely call it a civil family matter unless the district attorney decided to prosecute. She gave me the number for the Naperville Police Department's non-emergency line and the contact information for a legal aid clinic in Aurora. I thanked her, walked to my car, and sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes, gripping the steering wheel, screaming into my clenched teeth. A woman pushing a stroller glanced at me and hurried past. I must have looked unhinged. That night I drove to my parents' house unannounced. My mother opened the door holding a spatula, her phone pressed between her ear and shoulder. She was mid-laugh at something someone said, and her face dropped when she saw me. "I'll call you back," she mumbled and hung up. I pushed past her into the living room where my father was in his recliner, watching a Blackhawks game, a half-empty beer on the side table. I threw the printed account statement and the forged transfer form onto his lap. I was screaming before I realized it, a raw, ragged sound I didn't know I could make. "You forged my signature. You stole $400,000 from your own daughter. Are you insane? Are you criminals? How do you sleep at night?" My father picked up the papers, looked at them without expression, and then, very slowly and deliberately tore them in half. He tore them again and again until they were a pile of confetti on his lap. Then he looked at me and said, "That money was a down payment on a commercial warehouse in a prime location. Mark's company is going to be a regional player in 5 years. You'll thank us when you're getting quarterly dividend checks while your little liberal arts friends are drowning in debt." He said it like he was reading from a business prospectus. My mother stood behind me and I could hear her starting to cry, that wet hiccuping sound she always weaponized. She said, "You are so ungrateful. We gave you everything. We sacrificed everything for you. And now you come into our home and accuse us of theft. Do you know what stress we're under? Your brother hasn't slept in 3 days. He has employees who depend on him. This isn't about you, it's about the family." Then I heard footsteps on the stairs. Mark came down, barefoot, wearing sweatpants and a stained hoodie. He looked less angry than the last time, more calculated. He stopped on the bottom step and leaned against the banister with a smirk that I will never, for the rest of my life, forget. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "You can scream all you want, but nobody's going to believe you. You've been acting weird for months, probably on something." I didn't understand the pivot at first. "What are you talking about?" He shrugged, exaggeratedly casual. "You know, you dropped out of college. You've been mooching off mom and dad. And now that you blew through all that money grandma left you, you're trying to pin it on me. Classic addict behavior. Deflect, deny, attack." My chest went hollow. I said, "I haven't dropped out. I haven't lost anything. You're the ones who stole it. This is insane." My mother stopped crying. She wiped her eyes and her voice went eerily calm. "Honey, we were going to talk to you about this gently, but we think you have a problem. We found a pipe in your old room. And your behavior lately, the paranoia, the aggression. It's textbook." I felt the world tilt. I have never touched a drug in my life. Not marijuana, not pills, not anything stronger than ibuprofen. I was the designated sober friend at every college party, the one who held back hair and called Ubers. I didn't even drink caffeine past noon. But they had a narrative ready, and in the space of a few minutes, I understood the full scope of their plan. They weren't just stealing my money. They were preparing a defense, a story that would discredit me before I could ever expose them. My mother had planted a pipe in my childhood bedroom. They'd been seeding the addict story with relatives for weeks, I'd later learn. It was a trap, and I had walked right into it. I left that house in a daze, drove back to Chicago, and within 48 hours I watched the smear campaign unfold with the speed of a brush fire. My mother called her sisters, my aunts Diane and Carol, and told them through tears that they'd had to stage an intervention, but I'd run out, that I'd stolen money from the family, that they were so worried. My father called his brother. Mark called a couple of cousins. I started getting Facebook messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years. "We're praying for you to get clean. You can always reach out for help. Please don't contact us until you've been to rehab." My own cousin Lisa, who I'd babysat for free every summer as a teen, messaged me a link to a rehab center in Peoria with a broken heart emoji. My childhood best friend sent me a text that said, "I always knew something was off with your family, but I didn't know it was this. Get help." Every time I tried to explain, I was met with the same condescending, patronizing wall of concern. No one believed me. The speed and coordination of it was dizzying. My parents had spent 20 years building a reputation as the hardworking, selfless parents of a troubled son. Now they had a new villain for their story, and I was it. That betrayal was fast and brutal, and I was 100% innocent. It's one thing to be wronged by strangers, but when your own mother looks you in the face and helps destroy your reputation to protect your golden child brother, something in you permanently fractures. I didn't just lose my money that month. I lost my entire history, my identity, my family tree. I was erased and rewritten as a cautionary tale, and now I had nothing left but the slow, difficult work of not dying. The next 6 months were the start of the rock bottom years, and I want you to understand just how bad it got because I think that's what makes the ending taste so sweet to me now. The bank investigation went nowhere. After filing a fraud claim, a very tired detective named Rodriguez called me and said that because my parents were co-trustees, the bank considered the transfer internally authorized, even if the signature was questionable. The forgery was a matter for criminal court, but the district attorney's office declined to prosecute, citing insufficient evidence of intent to defraud and family complexity. The police told me it was a civil matter. I went to the DA's office myself, waited in a plastic chair for 3 hours, and finally spoke to a clerk who looked about 22 and said, "These family trust cases are messy. You really need a private attorney. We can't prioritize this. I called 10 lawyers from a list the legal aid clinic gave me. The cheapest one wanted a $5,000 retainer just to review the paperwork. Another told me that going after parents for breach of fiduciary duty was an expensive, multi-year battle with no guaranteed outcome, and if they'd spent the money, there was nothing to recover anyway. I had $1,600 to my name and a part-time job that paid $9.50 an hour. I was stranded. I had to drop out of DePaul because I couldn't pay the gap between my partial scholarship and the remaining tuition. My GPA at the time was a 3.71. I'd been on the dean's list 3 semesters in a row. I was 1 year from finishing my degree. The registrar's office sent me a formal withdrawal notice, and I remember opening the envelope in the lobby of my dorm and just staring at the letterhead while students laughed and walked past me with their backpacks. The paper said something like, "We regret to inform you that your enrollment has been terminated due to unpaid balances." I felt like a ghost. I packed 2 duffel bags, said goodbye to my posters and my cheap coffee maker and the life I'd built, and moved into my friend Jenna's living room couch in Logan Square. Jenna was a saint, a chaotic, generous art student who let me stay rent-free for 2 months. She'd make extra ramen and leave it on the arm of the couch for me when I got home from work. She'd listen to me cry at 3 in the morning and tell me my family was toxic as hell. But her boyfriend, a guitar player named Derek who already resented my presence, started making comments about how long guests should stay, and the tension grew thick. One night I heard them arguing through the thin wall, Derek yelling that he didn't sign up to support a stray. I left the next week. I didn't blame her. She had no obligation to save me. I found a sublet in a basement apartment in Humboldt Park listed on a sketchy Facebook group. The rent was $350 a month, which was all I could afford. The space was a single room carved out of a larger basement, with a shared bathroom upstairs that the landlord's family used. The walls were unpainted drywall, stained with age and moisture. The floor was cold concrete covered with a remnant of industrial carpet that smelled like wet dog and mildew. My room didn't have a window, just a single bare bulb dangling from the ceiling with a pulled chain. There was a cot with a stained mattress, a plastic dresser that wobbled, and a space heater that worked half the time. I could hear my neighbors' domestic disputes through the wall so clearly that I learned the names of everyone in their extended family without ever meeting them. Every morning at 5 a.m., the pipes would clang and shudder, and I'd wake up with grit in my eyes and a cough that took months to shake. I worked 2 jobs. My first was the breakfast and lunch rush at a diner called Stella's on Western Avenue. I'd show up at 5:30 in the morning, tie on an apron that smelled like old bacon grease, and serve eggs and coffee to construction workers and retirees who called me honey and tipped in loose change. I walked 5 miles round trip to get there because I couldn't afford a bus pass. My shoes wore through the soles, and I used duct tape to hold them together. The skin on my heels blistered and bled. I had a regular, an older guy named Frank who always ordered the same omelet and left a 50-cent tip. One morning he looked at my taped shoes and said, "Rough patch, huh?" I just nodded and poured his coffee. He slipped me a 20 after he paid, didn't say a word. I never saw him again after that, but I still think about Frank sometimes. There was another regular, a woman who always ordered tea and toast, who one day looked at my hollow cheeks and left a $10 bill under her saucer. Those small kindnesses kept me afloat in ways I couldn't articulate at the time. My second job was at a big box home improvement store, unloading pallets from 4 p.m. to midnight. I'd lift boxes of tile and paint and garden soil until my back seized and my hands blistered. The store was a 20-minute bus ride from the diner, and I'd eat a granola bar on the way. The manager, a guy named Todd, was a stickler for speed. He'd walk up and down the aisles with a clipboard timing us. I remember one night I dropped a box of ceramic tiles, and the sound was like an explosion. Todd ran over, red-faced, and screamed at me for 10 minutes in front of everyone. I just stood there, trembling, too exhausted to even defend myself. After he left, a coworker named Mike helped me sweep up the shards. "He's an ass," Mike said. "Don't take it personal." I didn't take anything personal anymore. I'd numbed out. I'd walk home at midnight through dark streets with my keys between my fingers as a makeshift weapon, flinching at every shadow. The walk was about a mile, and I'd pass under a viaduct where the streetlights were always out. I'd hold my breath, scanning for any movement, and then sprint the last block to my building. I slept 4 hours a night on a mattress I'd found on the curb during an alley scavenging run, wrapped in a sleeping bag I'd bought for $6 at Goodwill. The sleeping bag was meant for camping, with a cartoon moose on it, and it was the only cheerful thing in my life. I ate oatmeal packets mixed with hot water from the bathroom sink because buying milk was a luxury. I stole ketchup packets from the diner to make tomato soup. Once, I ate a jar of peanut butter over 4 days with a plastic spoon, scraping the sides until there was nothing left. I lost 18 pounds in 3 months. My clothing hung off me, my collarbones jutted, and my face in the mirror was gaunt and hollow-eyed. My hair started thinning, clumps of it coming out in the shower at the gym I'd sneaked into to bathe. I stopped getting my period entirely. Every time I tried to reach out to a family member, I'd get a text back like, "We're praying for you to get clean," or "Please don't contact us until you've been to rehab." The scripts were identical, as if they'd all been given the same talking points. I started to feel like I was disappearing, like my existence had become a ghost story they told to explain my absence. The narrative was so complete, so airtight, that I sometimes questioned my own sanity. What if I had imagined everything? What if the trust was never mine? What if I was the problem? That was the worst part, the way gaslighting creeps in and makes you doubt your own memory, your own self. The lowest point came in February of that year. It was -5 degrees outside, a polar vortex that froze the city solid. The landlord had turned off the heat in the basement because the upstairs tenants were complaining about the bill, and he claimed the basement wasn't a legal rental unit anyway, which I knew but couldn't contest. I was sitting on my mattress, wrapped in every piece of clothing I owned. 2 sweaters, a hoodie, leggings under jeans, 3 pairs of socks, a scarf wrapped around my head. I was shivering so violently my teeth clicked, a rhythmic chatter I couldn't control. My breath plumed in the air. I could feel the cold in my bones, a deep marrow-level ache. That's when my phone buzzed. It was a Facebook message from my cousin Lisa with a photo attached. The photo showed my parents, Mark and his girlfriend, at a fancy steakhouse called Sullivan's, toasting with champagne flutes. Mark was wearing a sport coat that looked new. My mother's hair was freshly done, her smile wide and genuine. The caption said, "Celebrating the grand opening of Mark's new warehouse. So proud of him for turning things around. Family first always." I stared at that screen until my vision blurred with tears. I didn't realize I was crying. I scrolled through the comments. My Aunt Diane wrote, "God is good. So happy for you all." My father wrote, "Hard work pays off. So proud of my son." Not a single mention of me, the daughter who was apparently in the grip of addiction. I was a blank space in their family portrait, filled in with lies. I opened my thread with my mother. Her last message to me was from 3 months earlier, a simple, "We love you. We're here when you're ready to get help." I tried to reply, and the message bounced back with a notification that I'd been blocked. I tried calling my father. The number didn't connect, just a generic carrier message that the number was no longer in service, which meant he'd changed it. I went on their Facebook pages and saw that every mutual relative had either unfriended me or hidden me from their posts. I was cut off, fully and completely, from every blood tie I'd ever known. I sat in that freezing basement and cried so hard I made myself sick, retching into a plastic grocery bag because I couldn't make it to the bathroom. The cold, the hunger, the isolation, it all crashed down at once, and I thought about how easy it would be to just stop fighting. Just walk outside in this polar vortex, find a bench, and let the cold take me. It would be peaceful, I thought. No more waking up at 5 a.m. to walk to a job that barely kept me alive. No more checking my phone for a message that would never come. No more feeling like a hollowed-out shell of a human being. That thought, the peace of it, scared me more than the cold. I recognized it as the voice of a mind in danger of giving up. I forced myself to call the suicide hotline. I dialed the number with shaking, numb fingers, and a woman named Grace answered after 2 rings. She had a warm, unhurried voice like a librarian or a grandmother. She asked if I was safe right now, if I had a plan. I said no. I didn't have a specific plan, but I didn't want to wake up tomorrow. She didn't panic. She didn't rush me. She just listened, really listened, while I sobbed out the whole story in jagged pieces. I told her about the trust, the forgery, the lies, the basement, the cold. She asked me if there was anyone I could call, any friend or counselor. I couldn't think of anyone. Then she said something I've carried with me ever since. "You're not the story they told. You're still here, and that means something. You've survived things that would break a lot of people. That strength is real. It's not gone. It's just tired. Can you be gentle with it tonight?" I didn't fully believe it, not then, but her words planted a seed. I promised her I'd try to get through the night. She stayed on the line until my shivering slowed and my breathing evened out. Then she gave me the number for a free counseling clinic in the city and told me to call them in the morning. I hung up, crawled under my sleeping bag, and slept for the first uninterrupted 4 hours I'd had in weeks. The next day, I showed up to my retail job with bruised eyes and chapped lips and a hollowed-out posture that must have looked alarming. My supervisor, a middle-aged woman named Carla who usually ignored me beyond barking orders about pallet placement, pulled me aside in the break room. Carla was built like a fireplug, with thick arms and a no-nonsense haircut. She'd always seemed hard, unapproachable. But that morning, she looked at me and said, "Hey, you look like you haven't eaten in a week and haven't slept in a month. What's going on?" The kindness in her voice, so unexpected from someone I'd assumed didn't care, broke something open in me. I sat down on a stack of boxes and told her everything, every ugly detail. I didn't expect her to believe me. I assumed she'd nod politely and then later tell the other managers I was unhinged. Instead, she listened, her face shifting from concern to anger, and when I finished, she cursed my parents out under her breath with a fluency that was almost artistic. Then she told me her own brother had pulled something similar on her years ago, with an insurance payout after her husband died. "Family can be the worst kind of predator," she said. "They know exactly where to bite." She handed me a $20 bill and told me to go buy a hot meal, a real one, at the diner next door. "You look like you're about to collapse," she said. "I'll cover your shift for an hour. Go, eat something with protein, then come back and we'll figure out next steps." That was the first time an unexpected ally appeared, and it started a slow chain of people who saw me and chose to help. I don't know why some people show up in your life at the exact moment you need them, but I'll never stop being grateful. Carla let me crash in her spare room for a month, a tiny bedroom in her bungalow in Berwyn with a twin bed and a floral quilt that smelled like lavender detergent. She didn't ask for rent. She just said, "Get on your feet, then pay it forward when you can." I slept better in that month than I had in years. I gained back 5 pounds. Carla also introduced me to her cousin, a woman named Sylvia who owned a small debt collection law firm in Oak Park. Sylvia was a 60-year-old force of nature, a bleached blonde pixie cut, cat eyeglasses, and a voice like a gravel road after a rainstorm. She'd built her firm from nothing after a divorce and had no patience for excuses. She interviewed me over coffee at her conference table, asked me 3 blunt questions about my work ethic and my willingness to learn, and then hired me as a file clerk at $12 an hour with all the overtime I wanted. "You're clearly not afraid of hard work," she said, eyeing my calloused hands. "And you've got a look in your eye that I recognize. You've been through a war and you're still standing. That's the kind of person I want in my office." I want to pause here and say that the next part of my life, the rebuild, was not a montage. It was painstaking and humiliating, and often felt like I was shoveling a mountain with a spoon while people on either side of me ran past with bulldozers. But it mattered because every tiny step forward was mine, earned through raw effort and sleepless nights. I had no safety net and no family, and somehow that felt liberating. Every dollar I saved, every skill I learned was something they couldn't take from me. Working at Sylvia's firm was the turning point. I started as a file clerk, which meant I organized folders, copied documents, and fetched coffee. But I was obsessive about learning. I'd sit in the break room during my 15-minute breaks, reading copies of old legal filings, trying to understand the language. I asked the senior paralegals questions about every document that passed my desk. A woman named Rosa, who had been with Sylvia for 20 years, started leaving me annotated copies of lien filings and foreclosure notices with sticky notes explaining the clauses. I'd take them home and study them like scripture. I taught myself the basics of bankruptcy law, real estate liens, and debt purchasing during my lunch breaks, sitting in the office kitchen with a tuna sandwich and a highlighter. The first time I correctly identified a junior lien that the firm's own software had missed, Rosa walked into my cubicle and said, "Why are you sorting mail? You should be in a paralegal program." That moment gave me a flicker of hope I hadn't felt since before the trust was stolen. Sylvia noticed too. About 6 months in, she called me into her office, a glass-walled corner with stacks of files on every surface. She motioned for me to sit, leaned back in her chair, and fixed me with a stare that could intimidate a statue. "You've got more brains than any of the associates I'm paying 80 grand a year," she said. "What the hell are you doing sorting mail?" I told her the truth. I didn't have a degree, and without a degree, no firm would hire me as anything but a clerk. She tapped her nails on the desk, thinking. Then she said, "Then get one. Nights, online, whatever works. If you enroll in a finance or paralegal program, keep working here full-time and get grades above a B average, I'll reimburse half your tuition. And if you graduate, I'll promote you to junior analyst." I cried in her office too, which was becoming a theme. She just handed me a box of tissues and said, "Save the tears for your enemies. Right now you've got work to do." So I enrolled in an online bachelor's program in finance at Southern New Hampshire University. I used a cheap, refurbished laptop that Carla helped me buy off eBay for $200. I worked at the firm during the day, from 8 to 5, and then I'd come home to my new apartment, a tiny studio in Berwyn that Carla's neighbor rented to me for $500 a month. It had heat that worked, a window that opened, and a landlord who fixed things when I called. It felt like a palace. I'd make a simple dinner, rice and beans or pasta with jarred sauce, and then sit at a card table with my laptop from 7 to midnight, chipping away at coursework. My courses were dense: corporate finance, accounting, investment analysis, real estate law, and a capstone on distressed asset valuation. I struggled with the math at first, crying over a statistics problem set at 2 in the morning more than once. But I was relentless. I asked professors for extra help during virtual office hours. I formed study groups with other online students via Discord, trading notes and encouragement. I studied on weekends in the Berwyn Public Library, a quiet brick building where the librarians learned my name and saved the Good Study Carol for me. It took me 3.5 years to finish, while working full-time and occasionally picking up weekend shifts at a temp agency to build my savings. I graduated with a 3.89 GPA and zero debt. Sylvia's reimbursement had covered the full half, and my small federal loans, which I'd minimized by living on practically nothing, were paid off within 6 months of graduation with a bonus she gave me as a gift. The day my diploma arrived in the mail, I framed it and hung it on the wall of my studio apartment, right next to a photo of my grandmother I'd salvaged from my childhood room. I remember standing there, alone, looking at those two things, and feeling something I hadn't felt in years: pride. Quiet, hard-won, unshakable pride. I had rebuilt my life from zero, and I had done it without them. My credit score, which I'd been nurturing with a secured card and meticulous payments, had climbed from 490 to 720. I had an emergency fund of $5,000 in a high-yield savings account. I had a small circle of friends who knew the real story and never doubted me, including Carla, Rosa, and a few neighbors. I wasn't thriving yet, but I was solid. Solid felt like a miracle, and the quiet anger that had simmered in me for years had transformed into something else: a patient, watchful patience that waited for an opportunity I didn't yet know existed. After graduation, Sylvia promoted me to junior asset manager. The promotion came with a salary of $52,000 a year and a job description that changed my entire trajectory. I analyzed distressed debt portfolios. Every day, I'd review lists of charged-off loans, credit card defaults, car loans, and commercial debt that banks were trying to sell at pennies on the dollar. My job was to identify which debts were worth purchasing and litigating for collection, based on the debtor's assets, employment, and property liens. It was forensic work, detailed and methodical, and I loved it. I got to peer into the financial wreckage of people's lives and find the leverage that would turn a pile of bad paper into recoverable money. I became expert at tracing liens, understanding priority positions, and calculating the exact cost of acquiring a debt versus the potential recovery. Sylvia mentored me personally, teaching me the art of the cold offer and the way to structure a purchase to minimize risk. She trusted me with more responsibility, and I devoured every challenge. I was good at this, really good, better than anyone I'd worked with, and I knew, somewhere in the back of my mind, that these skills had a specific application, but I didn't let myself dwell on it yet. Then, on a Tuesday in late April, a little over 10 years after that freezing night in the basement, I was reviewing a batch of old commercial debt from a regional bank that had been acquired in a merger. The bank was offloading a portfolio of about 80 charged-off accounts, mostly small business loans that had gone bad during the recession. I was scanning the spreadsheet, checking names and balances, when my cursor stopped on a row that made my heart physically skip a beat. The debtor name was Mark's Custom Builders, LLC. The original creditor was a bank named Prairie State Financial. The loan amount originated at $340,000, secured by a personal guarantee from Mark, with a second position lien on a residential property at an address I knew by heart. The house in Naperville my parents had helped him buy when he started the business. The loan had originated a year after the trust theft, which meant the warehouse he'd bought with my money had been used as collateral for this new debt. The account status was charged off, defaulted, no recoverable assets, except for the lien. The original balance had ballooned with interest and penalties to $412,000. The bank had recovered about $80,000 from asset liquidation and insurance, but the remaining balance, according to the notes, was considered uncollectible because the debtor had no income and the property was underwater. The entire portfolio was being sold for $18,000 to a bulk debt buyer, and this specific debt was just one line item among many, valued at essentially nothing. I sat at my desk and stared at my brother's name on that screen for about 15 minutes, my coffee going cold beside me. All those years of pain, the freezing basement, the stolen future, the family that erased me, it all came rushing back, but I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel glee. I felt a cold, crystalline focus, like a door had just opened onto a room I'd been preparing to enter my entire adult life. I walked into Sylvia's office, closed the door, and sat down. She looked up from her paperwork and must have seen something in my face, because she took off her glasses and said, "What's the matter?" I told her everything I hadn't yet shared about my past, the trust, the forgery, the smear campaign, the full decade of silence and suffering. She listened without interrupting, her expression unreadable. When I was done, she looked at the screen printout I'd brought, studied the number for a moment, and then simply said, "How much?" I told her the whole portfolio was 18, but I only wanted that one debt. She nodded once, picked up her phone, and called the selling broker. Over the next 2 hours, she broke up the lot, negotiated a single debt purchase for $12,000, and arranged the paperwork. The legal entity would be a small shell LLC that I created called Grandview Asset Recovery, with a mailing address at a P.O. box and my name not appearing anywhere. Sylvia arranged the wire transfer from my savings account, which at that point had grown to just over $15,000. I signed the documents, and the moment the wire cleared, I held in my hands a legal assignment of debt that made Grandview Asset Recovery the official creditor for a $412,000 debt, secured by a lien on my brother's house. I didn't act immediately. I spent 3 months documenting everything, triple-checking the lien position, verifying the property value through a drive-by appraisal, and making sure every legal and procedural duck was in a row. I hired a process server through a third-party agency, so my name didn't appear on any public filings. I waited until the redemption period on the underlying first mortgage was clear. At the time, Mark's house had an estimated market value of $380,000, with a first mortgage of $210,000 and my second position lien of $412,000 sitting behind it. The numbers meant the house was hopelessly underwater, but I didn't care about the equity. I cared about the ownership. I cared about the leverage. I formalized the notice of default and acceleration in early March, exactly 10 years and 4 months after my parents forged my signature, and had it served by a licensed process server in Naperville. I made sure the paperwork was impeccable, the notices filed with the county recorder, the timelines exact. Then I waited for the calls to start. Here's where the mid-story hook comes in, because I mentioned my family would come back needing something, and they did. About 2 weeks after the notice was served, my phone rang with a number I hadn't seen in a decade. It was my mother's cell phone. I let it ring 3 times, my heart pounding in my throat. Then I answered, keeping my voice even. She didn't yell or cry, not at first. She spoke in a clipped, anxious voice I'd never heard from her, a brittle, business-like tone. She said Mark had gotten some legal paperwork from a debt buyer called Grandview Asset Recovery, and his attorney said it was serious, that they could lose the house. "Do you know anything about this?" she asked. "Your father and we've been trying to figure out who's behind it, and we just wondered if maybe you'd heard something with your work in finance and all." I stayed perfectly calm. "I'm not sure what you're talking about. I haven't spoken to any of you in 10 years. I have no idea who Grandview Asset Recovery is." It was technically true. She paused, and I could hear her breathing hard on the other end. Then her voice cracked. "We know you're doing well now. We've seen your LinkedIn. Your father and I, we think it's time we put the past behind us. Your family, after all. And maybe you could help your brother with this thing. It's a lot of money, but if you have connections in the debt industry, maybe you can get it reduced. Or get them to back off for your nephews. They're just kids. They don't deserve to lose their home. I have 2 nephews I've never met, boys named Jacob and Tyler, who were born years after the estrangement. I'd seen their photos on my cousin's Facebook before I was blocked. They looked like happy, normal kids. I felt a pang of something, not guilt exactly, but a recognition of innocent casualties. But I also knew the offer on the table was a manipulation, a re-emergence only when they needed something. "I won't get involved in Mark's financial messes," I said. "If the debt is valid, he should handle it like an adult." That's what adults do. She started to cry, that same weaponized cry from the living room with the ZD, the exact same cadence, and I realized in that moment that she hadn't changed at all. She was still the same person who'd forged my name and told the family I was a drug addict. So I said, "You forged my signature, stole my inheritance, called me a drug addict, and abandoned me to freeze in a basement. I owe you nothing." She hung up. The next day, my father called from a blocked number. I almost didn't answer, but I did. His voice was low and rough, the voice of a man who hadn't been sleeping. He said, "I don't know what game you're playing, but I know you're behind this. I know you're the one who bought that debt. And if you don't drop this, I will make sure every single person in our family knows what kind of vindictive, cold-hearted monster you've become. I will make sure your name is dirt." I didn't flinch. I said, "Tell them. I'll mail you the forgery paperwork with the notarized affidavit from my grandmother's lawyer who I finally tracked down. I've got a folder 3 inches thick. If you want to go public, I'm ready. Otherwise, the foreclosure proceeds. I'm collecting a valid debt just like any other creditor." He sputtered something unintelligible and then the line went dead. A week later, my brother showed up at my condo building. I don't know how he got my address, but I suspect my mother hired a service or checked property records. I was coming home from work, walking into the lobby, and there he was, standing near the elevator, disheveled, sweating through a polo shirt that was too tight, my mother hovering behind him looking small and old in a faded cardigan. She looked older than her years, her face lined, her hair thin. Mark marched up to me, his face blotchy red. He started shouting, right there in the lobby, about lawsuits and deadlines and how I was trying to ruin his family. "My wife is talking about leaving me," he yelled. "My kids are scared because there are strange men taking pictures of our house for the bank. You're a monster, you're a psycho." I looked him in the eye and I felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, just a calm, clear resolve. I said, "Do you remember what you said to me when you came down the stairs that night? You told me nobody would believe me. Well, the bank believes me. The court believes me. A $12,000 debt purchase believes me. You have 60 days to cure the default or I will foreclose. That's not a threat. It's math." He called me words I won't repeat, filth that echoed off the lobby walls. I walked past him, nodded to the security guard who was already approaching, and said, "These people are trespassing. Please escort them out." The guard, a retired police officer named Mr. Harris who I'd befriended, put a firm hand on Mark's shoulder and guided him toward the door while my mother followed, her face a mask of twisted grief and fury. That was the last time I ever saw her in person. The confrontation phase was not a long, theatrical courtroom scene. It was a series of small, dignified refusals that stretched over several weeks. My brother hired a lawyer, a desperate man who sent my attorney a series of escalating settlement offers. The first offered $15,000 cash, which was less than I'd paid plus costs. My attorney, a colleague of Sylvia's named Mrs. Chen, a quiet and deadly effective litigator, sent back a one-sentence response. "No." The second offered $30,000 to be paid over 5 years at 0 interest. I declined. The third offered to release the lien if I'd accept a percentage of any future sale of the house, whenever that happened. I declined. The fourth offered $50,000, scraped together from selling Mark's truck and my parents' retirement accounts. I declined. Every single offer was met with the same polite, legally unassailable response from Mrs. Chen. "My client is willing to cancel the foreclosure upon payment in full of the outstanding balance of $412,000, or a lump sum settlement of $200,000 cash, due within 30 days. They couldn't come close to that. They'd spent everything on the business, and the warehouse and the life they'd built on stolen money. My parents tried to rally the extended family again, sending out emails and Facebook posts about my cruelty, my vindictiveness, my mental health struggles. I got a cascade of messages from cousins and aunts I hadn't heard from in a decade. One aunt said I was bitter and heartless, that holding a grudge for 10 years was unnatural. Another cousin said I was tearing the family apart over money. I replied to every single one with the exact same sentence. My parents forged my signature on a $400,000 trust and told everyone I was a drug addict. That is a felony. Would you like me to send you the notarized documents? Most didn't respond. Only one cousin, Lisa, the one who'd sent the rehab link years ago, replied. Wait, what? Send them. She'd been a teenager when the lies started. She'd been fed the story and never questioned it because why would she? I sent her the full package, the forgery analysis I'd had done by a forensic document examiner a year earlier, just in case I ever needed it, the bank statements, the legal opinions, the timeline. She called me the next day, her voice shaking. Oh my God, she said. I am so sorry. I am so sorry. I believed them. We all believed them. They were so convincing. And you were just gone. She's the only one I speak to now, the only thread of my biological family I've kept. She came to my condo for coffee last month and met my dog Mabel, and we cried together for about an hour. It didn't fix everything, but it closed a wound I didn't know was still open. The foreclosure process moved forward on schedule. I attended every required hearing. I filed every document on time. The sheriff's sale was scheduled for a Wednesday in late June at 10 in the morning on the courthouse steps. The day was hot and humid, the kind of summer day where the air feels like a blanket. I took the day off work. I wore a simple navy dress, minimal makeup, my hair pulled back. I didn't bring a camera or a supporter. I didn't post on social media. I just drove to the DuPage County Courthouse and parked 2 blocks away. I walked to the auction area, a shaded spot near the main entrance where the auctioneer set up his portable podium. A small crowd had gathered, mostly investors and lawyers representing lenders. My brother was there, standing near the edge with his wife, a woman I'd never met but recognized from photos. She was crying silently, her face blotchy, holding the hands of 2 young boys who looked confused and scared. The nephews I'd never met. My parents stood a few feet away, my mother gripping my father's arm like she might collapse. My father looked 10 years older than he was, his shoulders stooped, his face drawn. Mark saw me approach, and his face twisted with such raw hatred that an officer standing nearby shifted his stance. He took 2 steps toward me, his fists clenched, and the officer put out a hand. Sir, you need to stay calm or you'll be removed. He stopped, shaking. The auctioneer, a fast-talking man with a clipboard, read the legal description of the property, the case number, and the opening bid from the first mortgage holder, $180,000. That was the minimum they'd accept to release their senior lien. Then he opened the floor for subsequent bids. Because my second position lien was worth more than the property, there were only 2 legitimate bidders. The representative for the first mortgage bank, who would bid up to their owed amount and no higher, and me, representing Grandview Asset Recovery. I had instructed Mrs. Chen, who stood beside me, to bid only enough to clear the first mortgage and leave a small surplus. The bank rep bid $180. I nodded. Mrs. Chen raised her paddle and bid $185. The bank rep bid $190. We bid $195. The bank rep looked at his paperwork, conferred with someone on his phone, and then nodded. He bid $200,000. We bid $205. At that point, the bank's maximum recovery was reached, and they stopped bidding. The auctioneer looked around. Going once at $205,000, going twice. He paused. Mark started screaming. He screamed my name, screamed that I was a thief, screamed that I'd ruined his children. His wife pulled at his arm, sobbing. My mother made a keening sound I'll never forget. My father just stared at me with a look of absolute, gutted hatred. The auctioneer's gavel fell. Sold to the credit bidder for $205,000. The entire process took 6 minutes. After the hammer fell, I walked over to where they stood. Not close enough to be confrontational, but close enough that they could hear me without me raising my voice. I kept my hands at my sides, my posture straight. I said, "You took my grandmother's gift and you turned my entire family against me. I didn't cheat. I didn't lie. I just collected what you owed. The debt was valid, the lien was enforceable, and I gave you every chance to settle. You chose this path, not me. The house will be fixed up and sold, and I'll use the proceeds to start a scholarship fund in Grandma's name. So something good comes out of all this. You don't get to be part of it. Then I turned around, walked to my car, and drove to a coffee shop on the outskirts of Naperville where I ordered a latte and a blueberry scone and sat in the sun at an outdoor table for an hour, just breathing. I felt the deepest peace I've known since I was a child sitting in my grandmother's garden while she pruned roses. It was finished. The aftermath for them has been bleak, and I won't pretend that doesn't give me a quiet sense of justice. But I didn't orchestrate their ruin. I simply allowed the consequences of their own actions to land fully, without cushion. My brother's marriage fell apart within a year. His wife took the boys and moved to Michigan to live with her parents. She filed for divorce, citing financial devastation and emotional abuse, and the court granted her full custody with supervised visitation for Mark. He declared personal bankruptcy and now lives in a rented one-bedroom apartment in Aurora, working as a day laborer through a temp agency because his contractor's license was suspended by the state licensing board. The suspension stemmed from an investigation into his bankruptcy filings, which revealed he'd hidden assets during the foreclosure process, a fraud charge that my purchase inadvertently triggered when the court referenced his financial disclosures with the Leon records. He didn't go to prison, but he can't work in his field, and his reputation in the local construction industry is destroyed. My parents drained the last of their retirement trying to hire attorneys to delay the sale and fight the foreclosure. They took out a home equity line on their own house, then couldn't pay it back. They lost that house last fall, the beige split level with the manicured lawn where they'd raised us, where they'd lied to my face over baked ziti. It was sold at a short sale, and they moved into a senior income restricted apartment in Lombard, a one-bedroom unit with cinder block walls and a shared laundry room. My mother works part-time as a cashier at a Jewel Osco, and she has to stand on her feet all day despite a bad hip. My father had a minor stroke a year ago and mostly stays in the apartment, watching TV and brooding. He writes angry letters to local newspapers that never get published. They still tell anyone who will listen that I am the villain, the ungrateful daughter who destroyed the family over a misunderstanding. But the story has frayed at the edges. A few relatives have quietly reached out to me, asking for the documents. Lisa has become a quiet advocate, correcting the narrative when she hears it. The tide is turning slowly, but I don't need their validation anymore. I sold that Naperville house 8 months after the auction, after a modest renovation that I paid for out of pocket. The market had improved, and it sold for $290,000. After paying off the first mortgage I'd satisfied at auction and covering the repair costs and my legal fees, I netted about $60,000. I used the money to pay off my condo, fully fund a 6-month emergency account, and yes, I started that scholarship fund through the DuPage Community Foundation. It's called the Alina Hayes Memorial Scholarship, and it awards 2 small grants a year, $5,000 each, to first-generation college students who have been cut off by their families. The application asks for a brief essay about resilience, and I read every single one. Last year, I gave a grant to a young woman who'd been disowned by her parents for coming out. I wrote her a personal note that said, "You're not the story they told. Keep building." I didn't do this to be noble. I did it because I remember what it felt like to watch every door slam shut and think you'll never get one open again. I know that $5,000 isn't a fortune, but it's a hinge point. It's proof that someone sees you, and that can be enough to keep you alive. Now I work for myself, buying and selling small distressed real estate notes from my home office, and I clear about $90,000 a year. It's not wealth, but it's comfortable and entirely mine. I have a rescue dog named Mabel, a golden retriever mix who was found abandoned in a parking lot and who sleeps on my bed every night. I have a vegetable garden on my balcony where I grow tomatoes and basil and jalapenos. I have a therapist who I see twice a month, a kind woman named Dr. Patel who has helped me untangle the guilt and the anger and the shame that I still carry. I have a small group of friends who know the whole story and don't judge me. I take myself out for Thai food on Fridays and read novels in the park on Sundays. My life is quiet, and it is mine. Edit. I posted this originally to get it off my chest because the anniversary of the foreclosure just passed, and the response has been overwhelming. I'm not reading every comment because some of them are vile, but I did want to address a few recurring questions. Edit 2. Several people called me a monster for taking the whole house instead of just the money I was owed. I want to be absolutely clear. I gave my brother and my parents multiple opportunities to settle on terms that would have let them keep the property. I offered to sell the debt back to them for exactly what I paid plus 10% annual interest, which amounted to about $14,000. They told me I was extorting them and that they'd rather lose the house than give me a single cent. My attorney documented every offer, every refusal, so they chose that outcome, deliberately and repeatedly. I simply allowed them to live with their choice. That's not cruelty. That's boundaries. Edit 3. A lot of people are asking about my nephews and whether I ever think about how this affected them. I think about it every single day. Those kids didn't ask for any of this, and I grieve for the pain they've experienced. But I also need to be clear. Their father and my parents made a series of choices, starting with theft and defamation, that set this entire chain of events in motion. They had a decade to make things right, to apologize, to even acknowledge the truth, and they chose instead to double down on lies. I am not responsible for shielding children from the consequences of their parents' actions when those parents had every opportunity to prevent those consequences and refused. Saying that feels cold, but protecting my own mental and financial health doesn't make me the villain. And for what it's worth, I send anonymous Christmas gifts to the boys through Lisa. I don't sign them. I just want them to have something good that isn't touched by all this poison. Maybe one day we'll meet. Maybe not. Edit 4. For those asking if I ever confronted my parents with the forgery documents directly after the auction, yes. I sent them certified copies with a cover letter a month after the sale. The letter was simple. These are the documents that prove what you did. I'm sending them so you know that I know, and so you can't pretend otherwise. I don't need an apology. I don't need acknowledgement. I just need you to live with the truth. My father wrote me back a single-page handwritten note calling me a sociopath and saying he prays for my soul. My mother sent a text that simply said, "I wish you had never been born." So I guess that door is fully closed, locked, and the key is at the bottom of Lake Michigan. Edit 5. A few people asked if I ever felt tempted to use the money for revenge in a vindictive way, to humiliate them publicly or destroy their reputations further. The answer is no. That's not who I am. I wanted the clean, quiet satisfaction of the legal system doing exactly what it was designed to do, enforce a valid debt. I didn't need to scream or shame. I needed to stand on the courthouse steps, calm and prepared, and let the math speak for itself. That's the kind of revenge that actually changes you inside, because it's not about them. It's about proving to yourself that you are not powerless. Edit 6. Some people say I'm just as bad as they are for profiting off their misery. I disagree completely. There's a profound moral difference between stealing someone's inheritance through forgery and lies and legally purchasing a defaulted debt that the debtor was responsible for paying. I gave them chances. I played by the rules they violated. If that makes me a monster in your eyes, so be it. I sleep fine. Edit 7. What would you have done? If someone stole your future, erased you from your own family, and left you to freeze in a basement while they celebrated with champagne, would you simply forgive and forget because they share your blood? Or would you wait, quietly, methodically, for the exact moment when the universe places the leverage in your hands, and then use it with surgical precision? Because I'd do it all again. And this time I'd bring a lawn chair, a thermos of coffee, and a book. I'd finish the chapter before the auction even started. And when the gavel fell, I'd smile.